Emma's first love, who had recently ended his marriage, decided to leave her abruptly. Without hesitation, she ended our relationship. The reason was clear. Liam, her first love, had been betrayed. She didn't consider my feelings at all. In fact, she took to her social media to express her regret, stating, "I wish I could go back 8 years and prevent Liam from marrying that terrible woman." What I couldn't have foreseen was her wish coming true. Both of us found ourselves transported 8 years into the past. I chose to fulfill her desire by allowing her and Liam to reunite. However, I never anticipated that Liam would eventually lead her into another relationship. When I saw Emma's post on social media, I had just finished an exhausting 8-hour surgery. On my way back to the clinic, I collapsed in the hallway from sheer fatigue. When I regained consciousness, I was in a dimly lit nightclub. Vibrant lights flickered chaotically, and the loud music was overwhelming. Someone tapped my shoulder and laughed. "Jake, you're such a lightweight. One drink and you're out." As my vision cleared, I recognized the person standing before me. It was Liam, wearing a sharp white shirt and sporting a tidy haircut. His face held a friendly smile. I stared at him for a moment before stumbling towards the restroom. In the mirror, I saw a youthful face with no scars. I had indeed traveled back to my freshman year in college. Today was Liam's birthday. Apparently, I had accidentally consumed a strong drink and passed out on the couch for a while. Still groggy, I left the restroom and bumped into someone. Before I could apologize, a sweet voice spoke. "Are you all right?" I looked up to see a petite woman with delicate features. She wore a fitted white blouse and a pleated skirt that highlighted her slender figure. It was Clara. Our eyes met for a brief moment, freezing time. Ignoring her hesitant look, I shook my head and replied calmly, "I'm fine," before walking past her. Back in the club, I sank into a seat and grabbed a bottle of water. Just as I took a sip, Clara entered the room. Liam greeted her with a wide smile, placing an arm around her shoulders as he introduced her. "This is my sister, Clara. She's studying next door at D University." The chaotic lights continued their dance as she gave us a modest smile and a slight nod. If I hadn't considered our accidental encounter in the hallway, this would have been our first official meeting in my previous life. Clara was Liam's half-sister, the woman I loved and spent 6 years with. I realized she didn't reciprocate my feelings the day Liam got married. That night, I found her crying in her sleep, whispering, "Liam, Liam." In that moment, I felt empty. It took me a long time to understand the truth. Liam loved Clara, but I had loved her too deeply. Under the night sky, I sat in silence until dawn, convincing myself to judge actions, not thoughts. It was just a dream. It didn't mean anything. The next day, I acted as if nothing had happened and continued our relationship, holding on to her words. "He's just my brother." Things changed when Liam's marriage ended because his wife was unfaithful. I overheard him confessing to Clara, holding her tightly. "Clara, I never loved her. I've always loved you. Please, come back to me." He explained that his mother, suffering from a fragile heart condition, had threatened him, forcing him to pretend to love someone else and push Clara towards me. I wasn't sure if he was telling the truth, but Clara believed him. She was moved to tears. That same night, she came to me. After a long silence, she finally stammered, "Jake, we should break up." Looking into her beautiful eyes, I didn't have the strength to ask why. I was called away for an emergency surgery before I could process her words, suppressing all emotions with professionalism. I spent the next 8 hours in the operating room. When I finally stepped out, the first thing I saw was Clara's post on social media. "I wish I could go back 8 years and stop Liam from marrying that horrible woman." With this second chance, I began noticing details I had previously ignored or overlooked. Like the birthday cake Clara had made for Liam, the way she playfully took his drink as he downed glass after glass. Or how, at the end of the party, when a drunken Liam struggled to stand, she instinctively supported his arm, helping him walk. The other two roommates admired their bond, exclaiming, The connection between these siblings is amazing. Back then, I genuinely believed Clara was just his cousin. So, when Liam found someone he liked and started encouraging me to pursue Clara, I fell for her. Her radiant charm, gentle warmth, and thoughtfulness. It wasn't until the truth came out that I realized her kindness was reserved solely for Liam. No matter how I celebrated her birthday or anniversaries, or what gifts I gave her, her reactions were always lukewarm. Yet, whenever Liam was around, her attention was solely on him. From the beginning, Clara's heart had always belonged to Liam. Just after the party ended, I sat in the front seat, having called a designated driver to take us home. Clara had been pulled along and was now in the back with Liam. Everyone was half asleep. In the rearview mirror, I saw Clara gazing tenderly at Liam, who was just as drunk and unconscious. A light breeze lifted a strand of her hair by her ear. I stayed silent in the dim car, my expression unreadable. Through my barely open eyes, I watched Clara raise her right hand towards Liam, her voice soft and determined. Liam, this time, I won't let you marry someone else. My heart pounded violently in that moment. I closed my eyes and let the darkness envelop me, fully aware that Clara had also traveled back in time. She wouldn't let Liam marry someone else, and I wouldn't allow myself to be with her again. Returning to the dormitory, I lay on my familiar yet unfamiliar bed. The ceiling fan hummed, blowing bursts of hot air as I rubbed my aching head and drifted into sleep. In my dreams, I was trapped in a loop, reliving the 8 years with Clara from the day we met to the day we broke up. Over and over, I heard her say, "Jake, we should break up." A buzzing phone pulled me out of the nightmare. I opened my eyes and stared blankly before picking it up. A glance at my schedule jogged my memory. I had taken a part-time job tutoring English to a high school student. Checking the time, I quickly got out of bed, washed up, grabbed a bag of bread, and took the bus to the student's house. Fortunately, I was teaching English. My medical career had kept me informed as I frequently read the latest research in the field. After reviewing the lesson materials, I had a good idea of what to cover. The student was a high school girl. After finishing the prepared lesson, I began checking an essay her teacher had assigned, a simple topic. Me in 10 years. She rested her chin on her hand and asked, "Mr. Jake, do you think I can become a manga artist in 10 years? I replied confidently, "You absolutely can. You wouldn't need 10 years. In 8 years, she would become a wildly popular manga artist with a massive fan base. She then asked excitedly, "And you, Mr. Jake, will you have become a doctor by then?" "Yes," I said firmly. She nodded thoughtfully, then suddenly pointed outside the window, where a tall, slender figure walked under the shade of trees, holding a sky-blue umbrella. With certainty, she declared, "Then Miss Lily must have become a biological researcher." Through the veil of rain, our eyes met, and for a brief moment, my mind went blank. Memories surged forward unbidden. She wouldn't have 10 years. In 2 years, she would lose her life in a car accident. Her name was Lily. She was the prize student of the renowned biology professor at D University and widely recognized as the belle of the department. Her beauty and intellect often earned her spots on confession boards across universities, and she was frequently praised as the perfect combination of brains and charm. In my memories, our interactions had been minimal. We'd crossed paths a few times in the university library, but that was all. The day our lives truly intersected was also the day of our final goodbye. It was during my junior year, on the day I went to the clinic to visit Clara, who was ill. On my way back to campus, I was crossing a green-lighted pedestrian crosswalk with a group of strangers when a speeding car ran a red light and charged toward us. Before I could react, a black Mercedes suddenly appeared, racing forward to intercept the oncoming car. The screeching sound of tires filled the air as both vehicles collided and crashed into a distant guardrail. Instinctively, I ran toward the scene, but before I got far, an explosion erupted. Flames consumed the wreckage, blocking my vision. The cicadas in the nearby trees fell silent for a moment before resuming their deafening cries. No one inside the cars survived. Shrapnel grazed my forehead, leaving a scar. Later, the incident made headlines. The investigation revealed that the driver of the speeding car was a man who had lost everything to gambling and sought to take revenge on society. His car was loaded with gasoline. The other victim was Lily. The car she drove belonged to her professor. That day, she had been running an errand for him, picking up documents from another university. She just happened to be on that road at the wrong time. Her personal details quickly surfaced online. Photos of her flooded the internet, accompanied by an outpouring of admiration for her beauty and talent and grief for her untimely death. Among the comments, one stood out. She saved so many families. In a way, she died with purpose. After all, she had no one of her own. Lily had grown up without a father. Her mother passed away from an illness the year she took her college entrance exams. She truly had no one. No one to grieve deeply for her. No one to mourn her loss. Her unfinished research project was abruptly cut short. One time, when I brought flowers to visit her grave, I ran into her professor, a stout, older man. He stood silently before her tombstone, only breaking the silence with a heavy sigh when a light rain began to fall. This girl had such a bright future ahead of her, he lamented. For a long time afterward, I struggled with insomnia. My heart felt submerged in water, heavy and aching. Perhaps it was guilt or regret. A light tug on my sleeve snapped me out of my thoughts. Lily was no longer visible outside the window, and the student beside me was speaking again. Mr. Jake, I'm off to Lily's biology class now. Don't forget what I said earlier. Don't be late tomorrow night. I hadn't actually heard what she'd said earlier, but a distant memory from my previous life reminded me. Tomorrow was her birthday. Her parents were too busy to celebrate with her, so she had asked me to keep her company. The rain outside had stopped at some point. A warm beam of sunlight pierced through the clouds, and I suddenly remembered something I'd read online after Lily's death. Tomorrow was her birthday, but Lily never celebrated her birthday. The day she was born was also the day her firefighter father died in a blaze while on duty. He never got to see her. I doubted she wanted to hear happy birthday, but it was still the day she entered this world, and no one should spend that day alone. So, the next day, I arrived at the student's house early, carrying a cake and a gift. Lily was giving a lesson. The setting sun outside cast a warm glow. She wore a simple white dress and stood by the wooden table, holding a test paper, her gaze lowered as she read, serene and elegant. Seeing her like that, an image from my past life surfaced in my mind. A screenshot of a chat that I'd stumbled upon, its authenticity unknown, but the exchange was brief. Someone had asked her, "Lily, do you like someone?" "Yes," she replied. "Then tell him." 3 minutes passed before her next response appeared. "Never mind." Most people didn't believe that someone like Lily, the department belle, would have a secret crush. But by then, she was gone. And the truth would remain forever hidden, even if it was real. Her unspoken feelings would never see the light of day. Her absent father, her sick mother who passed away, her untold crush, her interrupted career, her unnoticed sacrifice. Her life was filled with regrets. Broken and incomplete. The prodigy of the biology department deserved a better ending. By the time the lesson ended, night had fully fallen. The student ran excitedly toward me, hugging the set of art supplies I had bought for her. She sighed wistfully. If only Lily could join us, the three of us would have had so much fun. I hesitated for a moment, then looked up at Lily as she packed her materials and prepared to leave. Without thinking, I called out, "Lily, why don't you—" Before I could finish, the city was plunged into a sudden blackout. Darkness swallowed everything. I cleared my throat, steadied my voice, and lied. "Lily, why don't you stay here? It's pitch black outside. It's not safe for a woman to be out alone." For a moment, silence hung in the air. The faint scent of her perfume drifted closer. I struck a match, cupping the small flame in my hand. The light cast a golden glow over her features. Her gaze was soft as she looked at me and said quietly, "Okay." Under the flickering candlelight, I brought out the cake and placed it in front of us. As the flames danced, I spoke with sincerity. Today, we celebrate the continuation of life. From now on, may it be safe and happy. No one wished more than I did for her to live a safe and happy life. In the dimly lit room, we divided the cake. The sweet aroma filled the air as the student rushed to grab her grade report, grinning widely. "Mr. Jake, my mom said I've improved a lot this time. She wants to treat you both to dinner as a thank you." Looking at the grades, a memory surfaced. In my previous life, this event had indeed happened. But that time, Liam had asked me to help him move props for a photo shoot, so I had politely declined the dinner invitation. This time, my gaze shifted to Lily, seated in the soft glow of the candlelight. I realized something. In the previous life, I was supposed to meet her at that dinner. In the end, I didn't make it to the dinner. On the way, I injured my leg, saving a child from being hit by a car and ended up in the hospital. To prove I wasn't just flaking, I even took a picture of my bandaged leg and sent it to the student's parent. The injury wasn't serious, just a mild scrape, so hospitalization wasn't necessary. While waiting for the doctor to clean the wound, I absent-mindedly scrolled through my phone and saw Liam's latest social media post. It was from an event hosted by their photography club. And of course, Clara was in the pictures. Where Liam went, Clara was sure to follow. I still remembered the day of our 4-year anniversary. Liam's girlfriend had decided to break up with him, and he had gotten drunk at a bar. His voice, filled with misery, begged over the phone. "Clara, I'm in so much pain. Can you come and keep me company?" At the time, we had just arrived at the restaurant I'd reserved. We hadn't even ordered yet when Clara stood up ready to leave. I offered to come with her, but she stopped me with an excuse. "Jake, Liam has always been proud. He wouldn't want you to see him in this state." "And you?" I asked. "We grew up together." "It's different," she replied. Not long after Liam reconciled with his girlfriend during a party, someone teased him about being a simp, claiming he'd always go crawling back to her. Drunk and angry, Liam retorted, "Crawl back to her? Don't be ridiculous. There are plenty of women who like me. I can replace her anytime." Clara was right there, lowering her head in silent humiliation. She must have always known. Liam was well aware of her feelings but pretended not to notice, allowing himself to enjoy the ambiguous relationship without any responsibility. As for me, Clara's simple excuse, "He's my brother and your friend," was enough to dismiss any protest I might have had. Thankfully, in this second chance, I was determined not to be their tool. After getting my wound treated, I hobbled out of the hospital. It started raining halfway home, and my injury couldn't get wet. Enduring the pain, I found shelter under a nearby building and prepared to call for a ride. But as fate would have it, my phone had died. The late summer breeze carried a slight chill, and just as I was resigning myself to waiting for the rain to stop, Lily appeared. She held her signature sky blue umbrella, running toward me with urgency. Raindrops splashed around her feet, soaking the hem of her dress. But she didn't seem to care. When she realized I'd noticed her, she slowed her pace and tried to act composed. Without saying a word, she handed me the umbrella, quickly pulling out a waterproof patch from her bag, gently lifting my pant leg to expose the bandaged wound. She carefully applied the patch with swift yet delicate movements, supporting my arm. She said softly, "The roads are narrow here. It's hard to get a ride. Let's move to a better spot." A little taken aback, I held the umbrella while she helped me walk. The faint scent of gardenias surrounded her as her hurried breaths filled the air. My gaze traced the curve of her shoulders, settling on her focused expression. Once we got into a car, I asked why she had come. Her answer was natural. The student's mom was worried, but had a meeting she couldn't miss, so she asked me to check on you when your phone was off. I had to search everywhere to find you. The air inside the car was damp and a little stuffy, likely due to the rain. I cracked the window slightly, unable to imagine how many places she'd searched for me. As fatigue set in, I eventually dozed off. When I woke up, the rain had stopped, and we had arrived at the campus gate. Lily carefully helped me out of the car, Before leaving, I thanked her with a small smile and lowered gaze. She replied, "You're welcome, Mr. Jake." Back in the dorm, I realized I was still holding her sky blue umbrella. By the time I went to return it to the university, autumn had arrived. My injured leg required rest, and the constant rain had kept me from leaving campus. On a sunny weekend, I impulsively decided to find Lily, not realizing how reckless I was to come without any idea of her whereabouts. Searching for her on a sprawling campus was like looking for a needle in a haystack. Unsurprisingly, I didn't find Lily. Instead, I stumbled upon Clara. Passing by the tennis courts, I heard someone shout amidst the chaos, "Call an ambulance!" She had fainted. Years of medical training kicked in. I instinctively ran over, pushed through the crowd, and knelt beside the unconscious girl to perform CPR. After about 15 minutes, she regained consciousness. Just as the campus nurse arrived as I stood up to leave, I noticed Clara standing in the crowd, staring at me. Dressed in a white pleated tennis skirt, she looked out of place. I met her gaze briefly before turning away, picking up the umbrella and walking off behind me. I heard someone ask, "Clara, do you know him?" "No," she replied. I found a nearby cafe to rest and regain my strength. The occasional tinkling of the door's wind chime punctuated the quiet atmosphere as I absent-mindedly played chess on my phone. The chime rang again, and a shadow fell across the table. Looking up, I saw Lily. The sound of a failed game buzzed from my phone as I smiled. Surprised. What a coincidence. Her lips curved into a soft smile. Not a coincidence. I came to find you. She placed her phone on the table, showing me a university confession page. The post featured a photo of me performing CPR on the tennis court, with the caption, "In 3 minutes. I need to know everything about this man." The post, barely half an hour old, already had hundreds of comments. Most were just joking around, but a few offered plausible theories. Judging by his CPR technique, he's probably from the med school. What's he doing at our university? The umbrella looks like a girl's. Is it his girlfriend's? Some even speculated Lily might be the girlfriend. I quickly looked away from the screen, feeling awkward. Picking up the umbrella, I handed it to her. I hadn't had a chance to return this yet. That evening, when I returned to the dorm, my gossip-hungry roommate shoved his phone in my face. On the confession page, a new post had gone viral. Case solved. Lily from the biology department is his girlfriend. Attached was a photo of me handing the umbrella to Lily in the cafe, overlaid with a soft pink filter that gave the scene a romantic vibe. Under pressure from my curious roommate, I explained the entire situation. After hearing the story, he sighed in disappointment but tried to console me. "Still, you might have a shot. Why not go for it?" Looking at Lily's contact in my phone, her simple nickname stared back at me. Lily. Her profile picture was a pure white paper crane. After some thought, I changed her nickname to Lily Teacher. Her social media was pristine, with only a single post. "The wind has risen." The timestamp. The day we first met. For some reason, the memory of another timeline came flooding back. 6 years after her death, on her anniversary, the rain had just cleared. The twilight sky glowed with warm hues as I brought flowers to visit her grave. The shadow of my figure stretched across her tombstone. I stood silently, gazing at the gray and white photograph of her serene and elegant face. Then, as if on cue, the wind stirred, the grass in the cemetery swayed lightly, and the leaves whispered as they collided. A few leaves floated down, landing on my shoulders. A sign, perhaps, of fate turning the page to a new chapter. Then, time rewound, and I was returned to the past. We met again. This time, I was relieved to return before meeting Clara. Instead of wasting energy plotting revenge, I was determined to be nothing more than a stranger to her. Just as she had said on the tennis court, "I don't know him." Freshman year passed in a blur of chaos and haste. If memory served, the new batch of D University students would include the girl Liam would fall for. She was Clara's junior by a year. In the previous timeline, Liam met her at a party. He fell for her, and his efforts to orchestrate encounters between me and Clara intensified. Eventually, through his constant meddling, Clara agreed to date me. Now, with Clara also back in time, I assumed she would prevent Liam from meeting that girl and ultimately end up with him herself. Or so I thought. But fate always has a flair for drama. During the final exam of the semester, I sat behind and to the right of Liam. I had just finished my paper and was about to hand it in when Liam, who had been dozing off at his desk, suddenly jolted awake, grabbing his test sheet. He scanned it briefly, then looked around wildly. Clutching the arm of the bewildered student beside him, he exclaimed, "What year is it? Tell me what year it is." I watched him silently for a moment, then stood up and left the exam hall. Outside, Clara was waiting for him. As I walked past, she called out to me. I stopped and turned to see her staring at me, her expression unreadable. "Are you with her now?" she asked. I wasn't sure what she was trying to imply, so I simply replied, "What does it matter to you?" The semester ended, and I didn't see her again for a while. I had thought that with a second chance, Clara and Liam would find mutual happiness. But things didn't turn out that way. Liam still didn't choose Clara. Even with a chance to rewrite his past, he fell for Clara's junior once again. His confession after his divorce in the original timeline had been nothing more than a lie. This time, Liam didn't try to push Clara and me together. Instead, he tried to set her up with Marco, the man who would later have an affair with his wife. I didn't know what had transpired over the break, but when I returned, Liam and Marco had become close friends. One evening, as I walked back to the dorm with a book in hand, I saw Liam and Clara talking under the streetlights. Without slowing down, I passed them, only to catch their conversation. "Liam, Marco is a scumbag. Why don't you believe me? Why would you introduce us? I can't stand him." Clara's voice was filled with frustration. Liam replied with calm persuasion. "Clara, trust me. You just don't know him well yet. He's a great guy. Just give him a chance, for me." Okay. 2 months later, Liam announced his relationship. That weekend, I attended a party and ran into a heavily drunk Clara in the dim hallway outside the private room. I was on my way back from the restroom when she suddenly lunged at me, wrapping her arms tightly around me. I shoved her off, but she clung to my arm again, refusing to let go. Tears streamed down her face as she choked out, "Liam, why are you with that awful woman? You must have been forced into it. You love me, don't you?" "I know you love me." Her grip tightened, and just as I was about to kick her away, her hand was abruptly torn off me. The sound of a slap echoed in the hallway. Clara staggered backward, her face now marked with a vivid red handprint. It was Lily. She had been attending a group celebration nearby and had stepped out for some air, only to stumble upon this scene. Clara, clutching her stinging cheek, finally seemed to sober up a little. Leaning against the wall, she looked at me with a frown. "Jake, there's nothing more to say." I grabbed Lily's hand and turned to leave behind us. Clara sneered, "You must feel pretty smug, don't you, Jake? I know you like me. Seeing me fail to end up with Liam must be so satisfying for you." She continued, venom in her voice. "So what if you're with her? She's just a ticking time bomb, a dying woman." I stopped dead in my tracks. Clara had crossed the line. She could insult me all she wanted, but she had no right to say that about Lily. I turned around and slapped her across the other cheek. "Shut your mouth, Clara," I said coldly. "She's not going to die because I'm here now. I couldn't go back and save her father from dying in that fire. I couldn't go back and save her mother from succumbing to illness. But I could save her now." As we left the hotel, the blaring horn of a passing car jolted me from my thoughts. That's when I realized I was still holding Lily's hand. Her palm was slightly warm and damp. Startled, I quickly let go and scratched my head awkwardly. "Sorry, I forgot. And, thanks for earlier." She clutched the hem of her skirt tightly, her gaze steady as she asked about what she said. My heart skipped a beat, and I interrupted her hastily. "She was drunk and rambling. Don't believe a word of it, Lily. You have a bright future ahead of you. A long, long future. She smiled faintly, then asked, "And you, Jake, you'll become an excellent doctor, won't you?" I met her gaze and nodded firmly. "As long as I'm alive, I'll do my best to heal and save lives." Liam ultimately failed to set Clara up with Marco. Yet Marco, seemingly undeterred, grew infatuated with her, refusing to leave her alone. In some twisted sense, Liam's objective was fulfilled. Marco likely wouldn't be the reason for his wife's infidelity in this timeline. What Liam failed to anticipate, however, was that Clara had also traveled back in time, like a drowning person clutching at a lifeline. Clara stubbornly clung to the lie Liam had told her in the previous timeline. That lie, however cruel, had become her only oxygen, sustaining a desperate, suffocating love. In the end, it was Liam himself who shattered that illusion. It happened at a party I wasn't present for. When my roommates returned to the dorm that night, their expressions were complicated as they recounted the scene to me. Liam got drunk and punched Marco. Nobody could hold him back. He kept yelling that Marco had cuckolded him. The more his girlfriend tried to calm him down, the angrier he got. "But what's weird," the other roommate added, "is that Clara just stood there smiling, watching her brother lose his mind." I froze for a moment, caught off guard, but said nothing. That wasn't peace on Clara's face. It was resignation. She had realized the truth. Liam had also traveled back in time. Not only did he refuse to choose her, but he had also treated her like a pawn, even pushing her toward Marco. To Liam, Clara had always been a joke. After that, I didn't see Clara seeking Liam out anymore, not that he seemed to care. I crossed paths with Clara a few times at D University when visiting Lily. One incident stood out vividly. Lily and I were eating at a newly opened restaurant near campus. On the way back, we passed an outdoor barbecue stand where a commotion caught our attention. A thug was harassing a group of students, loudly taunting, "So you're the one refusing to be our boss? Marco's girlfriend? He's been chasing you for days, and you think you're some kind of goddess? A piece of trash like you." Before he could finish, one of Clara's male classmates stood up and punched him square in the face. The scene descended into chaos. Shouts, screams, and the sound of shattering glass filled the air. Amid the turmoil, a broken beer bottle flew straight toward Lily. Acting on instinct, I pulled her into my arms. The shard grazed my cheek, leaving a thin, bloody cut. "Jake," she cried out in alarm. I quickly ushered her into a nearby dumpling shop, reassuring her, "It's okay, don't be scared." The commotion outside had subsided by the time the police arrived. Lily gently cleaned my wound with bottled water and pulled out a cartoonish green bandage from her pocket. As she leaned in to carefully apply it to my cheek, Clara entered the shop. She was accompanied by a few others from the fight, all with varying degrees of injuries. Lily ignored them, continuing to tend to my wound. Suddenly, Clara kicked a chair and yelled, "So noisy." The next day, as snow softly fell, Clara intercepted me on campus, dried blood still clinging to her lips, and her gaze a mix of emotions. "Jake," she began, "you two won't work out. It's my advice to you, don't be with her." Her words chilled me, and I turned away with a cold reply. "I'm not a psychiatrist. If you're mentally ill, don't come looking for me." Her mocking laugh echoed. "Jake, you should have been in love with me." In this lifetime, I had lived a peaceful, steady life, with only one disaster: Clara and Liam, who wasted 6 years of my time. Lily, however, was the person I owed a life to. When I first returned to the past, I thought my purpose was to undo the mistake of being with Clara. But it wasn't. One afternoon near the end of sophomore year, I was startled awake from a nap by a nightmare. In the dream, I was back at that crosswalk. As the crowd and I crossed the street, a speeding car barreled toward us. I watched helplessly as the black Mercedes intervened, the explosion following soon after. The old ceiling fan overhead spun noisily as I stared blankly at the ceiling. A cold realization dawned on me. I always knew this was an unsolvable problem. Beyond knowing the driver's motive, revenge against society, I had no information about him. I could save Lily. I could avoid that intersection altogether. But what about the elderly, the children, the pregnant women, and the students who would still be there? Once, in desperation, I went to the police, clinging to a one-in-a-million hope. Their response was dismissive. Have you been watching too many sci-fi movies? We solve cases with science, not pseudoscience. In early June, as high school entrance exams loomed, both Lily and I finished our tutoring jobs. By then, I had known her for almost 2 years. She had never mentioned any special someone, nor had I seen anyone close to her. I was convinced that the screenshot of her secret crush was fake. If it were real, the thought that she died without ever confessing was heartbreaking. I had often imagined the kind of man she might like. Perhaps someone sunny and handsome, or talented and outstanding, someone as extraordinary as her. But no matter the type, he would undoubtedly be exceptional. One evening, after a dinner invitation from the students' parents, Lily and I walked through a moonlit alleyway. Perhaps it was the melancholy of knowing we'd part ways at the end of the road. Or maybe the night itself stirred old feelings. Passing under a dim street lamp, I casually asked, "Lily, do you like anyone?" She paused for a long moment before replying with a question of her own. "Why do you ask?" I shrugged, pretending nonchalance. "If you do, you should tell them. Life's too short for regrets." We stopped at the intersection. She turned to me and said, with surprising seriousness, "Thank you, Jake." I assumed she was thanking me for the advice and thought nothing of it. On the eve of the day Lily died in the previous timeline, her professor asked her to drive and retrieve some documents the next day. This time, I intervened. I casually suggested she go in the afternoon instead, mentioning that a friend had given me 2 movie tickets for the morning. To my surprise, she agreed. The movie was about time travel, meaning going back to fix his mistakes, only to realize it was all a dream. Halfway through, I excused myself, claiming I needed the restroom. It was an ordinary moment. Just like any other day, outside the theater, I got into a rented car and drove to that intersection. Realizing along the way, our meeting was always destined to end in separation. "Lily, this time I'll let you see the future world." As I stood at the intersection, waiting for the car to appear, an explosion suddenly erupted nearby. My heart seized. I bolted toward the scene, phone in hand, frantically dialing Lily's number. No one answered. Standing before the burning wreckage, my vision blurred as tears welled up. The dizziness hit me like a wave, and the last thing I remembered was the haunting realization. I still hadn't saved her. I woke up in a hospital room. The familiar scent of disinfectant lingered in the air, the phone on the bedside table, the white coat hanging nearby, and the familiar faces of the nurses. All of it told me one thing. I had traveled back again. This was 8 years later. The nurse told me I'd been unconscious for about 20 minutes. I stared at the fluttering curtains, momentarily unable to distinguish whether I had dreamed of the past or was dreaming of the present. It wasn't until I splashed cold water on my face in the restroom and noticed that the scar on my forehead was gone that I realized. It was real. I had truly traveled back, with trembling fingers. I opened my phone's browser and quickly searched for any mention of that fateful car accident. I found only a brief, obscure report from long ago. No trending news, no mention of Lily, no grave. I began asking people around me, probing whether they remembered the car accident from 6 years ago or the brave college student who had sacrificed herself to save others. The responses were always the same. "Jake, are you sure you're not misremembering? I think there was an accident, but it didn't trend or anything." "I don't know. 6 years ago is such a long time. Maybe I didn't notice, or I forgot." Lily had no family, and her former classmates had scattered to different parts of the world. And then I could only think of going to her university to find her professor. But even he had left the country. I couldn't find any trace of Lily, any person or evidence tied to her existence. The only proof I had that she was real, that we had ever crossed paths, was in my phone. In our last conversation, the final message she sent was 6 years ago, on the eve of the accident. Sure, let's watch a movie tomorrow. For 6 years, the thread of our chat remained silent. I deleted and rewrote countless messages, but I never sent anything. As long as I didn't confirm it, I could believe she was still alive. I started walking around to university whenever I had free time, often wandering aimlessly to the lake where we used to go. Lily's lab was on the ground floor nearby. Sometimes, through the clear glass windows, I thought I caught a glimpse of her slim figure in a white lab coat, bent over a desk, jotting down notes. But when I blinked, the vision would vanish. Clara sought me out on the second day after my return. She pleaded with me, saying she didn't really want to break up and was just throwing a tantrum that day. I paused my work, looked up at her, and calmly asked, "Clara, were we ever together?" Her face turned pale as the blood drained from it. The truth was, she had no proof. The 6 years of our relationship, like Lily's sacrifice, had vanished in this timeline. Fate had rewound the clock for the four of us. Back to 8 years earlier, Clara, determined to change Liam's fate of marrying someone else, had reshaped our relationship in her pursuit of him. While she ultimately realized she had been nothing more than a pawn, she and I were no longer connected. Desperately, she tried to find evidence of our 6-year relationship, but it was futile. There were no shared photos, no mutual friends, no surveillance footage. Time passed, and my colleagues, who once gossiped about Clara, began to pity her. Such a pretty girl. What a shame she's lost her mind. I smiled and gently told her one day, "The psych ward is to your left. Maybe check it out." Liam, too, wasn't spared. Though he had avoided Marco's involvement with his wife, people who cheat will always find a way to cheat. During the time Clara was fixated on proving our past, she was also dealing with Marco's obsessive advances and Liam's relentless pleas. Liam, desperate to convince Clara of his love and circumstances, grew more erratic. Eventually, even Clara lost her patience. One day, while retrieving some documents from the pathology department, I saw Clara from a distance. She was sobbing, clutching papers in her hands, yelling at 3 people in front of her. I didn't stay to listen and walked away. Later, I learned from colleagues that Clara had overheard Liam's mother confessing the truth. Through a DNA test, it was revealed that Liam and Clara were half-siblings, sharing the same father. In mid-May, I was invited to deliver a lecture on first aid techniques at a university. The lecture hall was packed, and as the event ended, I gathered my materials and prepared to leave. As I scanned the dispersing crowd, a familiar figure caught my eye, but before I could focus, she was gone outside. The evening sky was dark, and a fine drizzle began to fall. I hesitated, holding my folder above my head as makeshift protection. Just as I prepared to dash into the rain, a blue umbrella appeared beside me. The familiar scent of gardenias wafted in. Droplets slid down the tilted surface of the umbrella as my heart skipped a beat. Slowly, I turned my head. There she was, Lily. Her features were as gentle and refined as I remembered. 6 years had passed, but she remained unchanged, as though time itself had bent to preserve her. "Lily," I whispered, my voice trembling, as though time itself had bent to preserve her. "Lily," I whispered, voice trembling. After the car accident explosion, Lily was taken abroad for treatment by her professor and remained in a coma for about 2 years. When she woke up, she stayed abroad for therapy and studies. It wasn't until now, 6 years later, that she returned home, joined a research institute, and became a biology professor at the university. This was her concise summary of 6 years of life. I blinked. The thousands of words I wanted to say in the moment condensed into just 2. That's wonderful. It was wonderful that she was alive. The former D University student was now Professor Lily. I heard that her lectures were so popular among male students that many had to stand just to attend. Curious, I decided to check it out for myself. But unfortunately, she had swapped her class with another teacher. When an elderly man walked into the classroom, a wave of groans erupted from the male students who left in droves, feeling conflicted as I watched the old man's dejected expression. I hesitated before deciding to stay. I sent Lily a text. "Do you have class today?" The next moment, a low voice spoke behind me. "No, I don't." Turning around, I saw that familiar, stunning face. Lily was dressed in a white knitted dress. Her hair was pinned up and she wore a pair of fine-framed glasses. No wonder no one recognized her. Startled, I was about to ask why she was here when she shyly pointed at my phone. It was a text from her. "I saw you enter this classroom and was curious about what course could interest you enough to attend in person." She smiled lightly, her tone faintly teasing. Turns out it was my class. I was speechless. Over the 6 years, Lily's personality seemed to have shifted. She was still distant and composed, but now with a certain restraint that wasn't there before. From that moment on, my relationship with Lily resumed its dynamics from 6 years ago, but with an unspoken difference. I decided to visit her on campus to express my feelings. However, I inadvertently overheard a conversation. It sounded like one of her colleagues, lamenting over love troubles. "Lily, how can I make him realize I like him? You wouldn't understand the pain. Someone like you doesn't have these kinds of worries." Lily didn't respond. The colleague pressed further. "Come on, be honest. You've rejected so many people. Do you already have someone you like?" Holding my breath, I heard her softly hum an acknowledgement. I admit it, I like Lily. As for when my feelings of wanting to make amends transformed into love, I couldn't trace it back. But if she already had someone she liked, I shouldn't become an obstacle in her path to happiness. Previously, I thought rumors of her having a secret crush were baseless. Now it seemed they were true. So I kept my distance and stopped replying to her messages. 3 days later, she appeared in my consultation room. Frustrated, I told her, "Lily, you don't have to come here every day." Her expression was serious as she replied, "Doctor, I booked an appointment and waited my turn. What I mean is, you don't need to keep coming for minor issues." She bit her lip and hesitated. Then she admitted shyly, "Actually, I'm not here for medical reasons." Before she could finish, a man stormed into the consultation room brandishing a knife. I recognized him instantly. He was the man whose wife had taken her own life after enduring his abuse. He blamed the clinic for failing to save her, pointing the knife at me. He roared, "You killed my wife!" In the chaos that followed, I subdued the man, but Lily got injured in the process. Standing by her hospital bed, looking at her pale face, I sighed heavily. The words I had planned to say condensed into just 3. "I'm so sorry." After taking care of her for half a month, I drove her home and suggested gently, "Maybe I should hire you a housekeeper instead." Her fingers paused mid-typing on her phone. Turning to me, she asked, "Why would that be inconvenient?" The car fell into silence. Wind blew through the window, making her hair flutter and sending ripples through my otherwise calm heart. I gripped the steering wheel tightly and kept my eyes on the road, saying nothing more. In the end, she refused to let a stranger into her home, so I took on the responsibility. She didn't need much care, though. I would prepare lunch before work, eat breakfast with her, then return in the evening to share dinner. As time passed, an odd feeling began to stir within me. One evening, I had to attend a colleague's birthday party. I called her to let her know I'd be late. When I arrived home, a sour smell greeted me. "Lily, what are you eating?" I asked. She looked at me with a straight face and replied, "Can't you tell? I'm eating vinegar." Speechless, I glanced at her plate. It was a dumpling takeout with a dish of vinegar filled to the brim. I cooked her a bowl of noodles, opened the windows to air out the smell, and reminded her, "Don't eat like that again. The vinegar's too strong." She lowered her eyes, silently eating the noodles. That night, the atmosphere between us was heavy. After running her a warm bath, I turned to warn her not to get her wound wet but accidentally bumped into her. She slipped, and I caught her just in time. My heart pounded violently, and I couldn't tell whether it was hers or mine. She looked up at me, her eyes like the first blossoms of spring, mesmerizing. In the misty bathroom, with her body so close to mine, a fire ignited between us. I blurted out, "Lily, I need to confess something." She bit her lip, her voice trembling. "What is it?" "I have feelings for you," I said, my voice steady. Her cheeks flushed and she admitted, "I was actually going to confess to someone at the clinic that day." My breath hitched. I grabbed her waist and pressed her against the sink. Sometimes, treating a patient requires finding the root cause. It takes multiple sessions and the right dose of medication. Sometimes harsh, sometimes gentle. But when the timing is right, even the most stubborn wounds can heal. Shortly after Lily and I started dating, I brought up a question that had been bothering me for a long time. "Why didn't you contact me at all during those 6 years abroad?" At the time, she was nibbling on the pineapple pastries I bought her. Upon hearing my question, she suddenly leaned into my arms. The faint scent of gardenias lingered in the air as she spoke in a pitiful voice. I was scared. Before I could respond, she continued, "I was afraid of becoming a burden, afraid that I wouldn't deserve you anymore. I was afraid that if I reached out, I'd start wanting more. And I was terrified that you might already have someone else you loved." In the silence that followed, a pang of bitterness rose within me. My chest tightened, and my eyes stung. Hugging her tightly, I whispered with conviction, "Lily, I promise I'll treat you well from now on and make it up to you." For a moment, she was silent. Then her hand slipped down my shirt. She chuckled softly, her voice teasing, "Not later. I want you to make it up to me now. It's time for you to hand in your assignment." I was speechless. The tender atmosphere was instantly shattered. After that, I dedicated myself fully to making it up to her in every possible way. The first time Lily brought me to meet her parents was half a year into our relationship. I wasn't expecting to find myself standing in front of a gravestone. The photo on the tombstone was of a beautiful, gentle woman. Though her final days were consumed by illness, I was startled. I had been there when she passed away. My father was her attending physician. In my senior year of high school, whenever I visited my dad at the hospital, I often saw this woman. If my dad wasn't in his office, I'd wait for him in her room instead. Over time, we got to know each other. I would cut fruit for her, fold paper cranes, and chat with her. She passed away just before my college entrance exams. That was my first close encounter with terminal illness and death. It helped me understand why my parents were so preoccupied with their work at the hospital. That's also why I chose to major in medicine, a field I had previously disliked. Back then, I naively thought cancer was the only disease beyond cure. I wanted to find a solution, but after studying medicine, I learned that very few illnesses are truly curable. I never expected that this woman was Lily's mother. On the way home, I leaned against the car window, watching the passing scenery. In a low voice, I said, "Lily, actually, I met your mom a long time ago." She replied calmly, "I know." Something in her tone made me pause. I wondered if she had seen me back then. I ran into Clara again 6 months later. On a quiet evening, Lily had texted me saying, "I'll be there in 10 minutes." I changed out of my work clothes and headed for the elevator. That's when I saw Clara, her face pale. The two of us were alone. The silence stretched as the elevator descended. When it reached the first floor, I stepped out only to feel my arm being grabbed. She looked up at me and asked, "Jake, can we talk?" Pulling my arm free, I said coldly, "Clara, let's not waste each other's time." She seemed to anticipate my response. With a self-deprecating laugh, she said, "You might not believe me, but in another timeline, we were together for 6 years." I turned to leave without replying. Behind me, her voice lowered. "Too bad I didn't treat you well and ended up losing you." My steps faltered for a brief moment before I continued walking outside. Near the flower beds, Lily was waiting for me, bathed in the warm hues of the setting sun. She looked radiant. I suddenly remembered an earlier incident. When a parent of one of my students invited us to dinner, I had arrived early to thank her for visiting me in the clinic after I was injured. "Surprised?" the parent said. "I never asked Lily to visit you. I only mentioned why you weren't there." And then she said she had something to do at school. The memory faded as I took Lily's hand. Gently, I tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. She wrapped her arms around my arm, leaning lightly against me. "It's getting windy," I said, looking at her with a smile. Lily's perspective. The internet wasn't wrong. I was just one person, and better me than countless families being destroyed. But I'm not that noble. Self-preservation is human nature. Still, if the life saved was someone I cared about, I'd gladly trade my life for theirs. After the explosion, when I regained consciousness, I found myself trapped in a cemetery. At first, on the anniversary of my death, the people I saved and some strangers came to visit. I often heard words of gratitude and praise, saying my sacrifice was meaningful. Over time, though, only Jake kept coming. He rarely spoke, usually just placing flowers before my tombstone, tidying the surrounding area, and sitting quietly for a while. The first time I heard him speak was on the 4th anniversary of my death. By then, no one else visited. Amidst the misty drizzle, he stood in front of my tombstone, gazing at my photo as he solemnly promised, "Lily, don't worry, I won't forget you." That was the first time he called me by name. I never expected to meet him in death. But if given the chance, I'd still make the same choice. I never expected to meet him in death. But if given the chance, I'd still make the same choice. So, when I unexpectedly returned to the past, 8 years before my death, I chose the same ending for myself. I knew Jake had also returned. I knew his approach was driven by guilt and a desire to make amends. But that was enough. It was better than not knowing him at all. The years I spent alone felt unbearably long. Yet the 2 years I knew him made time feel fleeting. If I couldn't be his lover, then being someone he could never forget wasn't so bad. I didn't remember the face of the man responsible for the crash or his license plate. But I vividly recalled him tossing beer cans out the window just before the intersection. When I accelerated and blocked his path, an irrelevant thought popped into my head about a movie I never got to finish. I guess I'll never know how it ends. That late spring, I took leave from school to visit my mother at the hospital. The room was quiet. She was still asleep. I moved to the other side of the bed to read, only to notice a plate of sliced fruit and a pure white paper crane on the bedside table. Pausing in surprise, I watched as my mother woke up and smiled gently. "Jake left those for me," she said warmly,